Story Part 1. Plain paragraph. Continuous narrative. The auction took place on a wind-scoured patch of dirt outside the town of Red Hollow in the summer of 1873, where desperation clung heavier than the heat, and men gathered not to trade cattle or land, but to settle debts that smelled of shame and whiskey. She stood barefoot beside her father, wrists bruised from rope, head lowered not from submission but from exhaustion, her long black hair veiling a face still marked by girlhood, though life had already carved its cruelty into her bones. Her name was Ayana, though no one there bothered to ask it, because names had no value when hunger spoke louder than dignity. Her father, once a proud man of their people, had lost everything to cards and bottles, and when the storekeeper came calling with a ledger thick with red ink, the debt could no longer be denied. $4. That was all it took to erase a future, to turn a daughter into currency. The auctioneer cleared his throat, voice rough as gravel, announcing the terms with a smirk that twisted the crowd's mood into something eager and vile, explaining she would be sold as a wife, no questions asked, no returns, no mercy. Laughter rolled through the men like thunder, and Ayana felt her stomach tighten as eyes crawled over her skin, measuring her not as a human being, but as a thing to be owned. Her father did not meet her gaze. His silence screamed louder than apology ever could. Bidding was lazy, careless, as if the men feared even $4 was too much for a girl they believed would break or run, until one voice cut through the noise, low and steady, offering a single coin more than the opening price, and when heads turned, they saw him standing apart from the others, a cowboy dressed in dust and shadows, hat brim low, face unreadable, eyes sharp but not cruel. $4. No one challenged him. The gavel came down. Just like that, her life changed hands. As the crowd dispersed, muttering disappointment at the lack of spectacle, the cowboy approached her slowly, as if wary of startling a wounded animal, and for the first time that day, Ayana looked up and met his eyes, expecting hunger or ownership, but finding something unfamiliar, resolve tempered by restraint. He cut the rope binding her wrists without ceremony, placed a worn canteen in her hands, and said only his name, Elias Crow, before turning away and walking toward his horse, trusting she would follow, and though fear screamed inside her to run, she followed because fear had nowhere else to go. The ride out of Red Hollow stretched long and silent, the land opening into rolling plains and distant mountains that seemed to watch her with ancient patience, and as the sun dipped low, Elias finally spoke, telling her she would not be touched, not tonight, not ever unless she chose it, his voice firm enough to sound like a vow rather than a promise. Ayana did not answer, because words had betrayed her too many times, but she listened, storing every syllable like a weapon she might need later. They camped beneath a sky thick with stars, and when Elias handed her a blanket and took his own bedroll several paces away, turning his back to her as if to grant privacy she had not known she was allowed to have, something inside her cracked, not into relief, but confusion, because kindness felt more dangerous than cruelty when survival had taught her to expect pain. Days passed as they traveled westward, and she learned through fragments that Elias was no saint. He carried scars earned in violence, spoke little of his past, and rode with the alertness of a man who had been hunted. But he treated her not as a possession but as a companion, offering choices where none had existed, asking her opinion on routes and camps, teaching her to handle a rifle not as a threat but as protection. Yet freedom was a fragile illusion, and she knew the law would see her as his wife whether she consented or not, a legal fiction that could trap her as tightly as chains if he chose to enforce it. One night, as rain battered their shelter and thunder shook the earth, she finally asked him why he had bought her, and his answer came slow, weighted with memory, as he told her of a sister sold the same way years before, lost to a man who believed ownership granted cruelty, and how he had arrived too late to save her, carrying that failure like a bullet lodged in his chest, determined never again to stand by while a woman was turned into payment for another's sins. Ayana listened, tears mixing with rain, realizing that their lives had intersected not by chance but by the echo of injustice repeating itself across different names and faces. But redemption is never simple, and as they neared the territory bordering Elias's land, shadows from his past began to surface, men who recognized him not as a savior but as a threat, whispers of a bounty tied to his name, and Ayanna understood that the freedom he offered might demand a price of its own. When gunfire shattered the quiet dawn one morning, and Elias shoved her behind cover, returning fire with deadly precision, she saw the truth laid bare. This man had blood on his hands, and the world would not allow him to outrun it easily. In the aftermath, as smoke drifted and bodies lay still, Elias turned to her with an expression carved from regret and resolve, telling her she could leave, that he would take her to the nearest town and set her free before his enemies closed in. But Ayanna, who had been bought and sold without choice, felt something fierce rise in her chest as she refused, not because she owed him, but because for the first time someone had offered her a path and trusted her to choose it herself.